Welcome to the Alex Merced Cast, where Alex Merced of AlexMerced.com brings you principled, thoughtful, libertarian commentary on issues that matter.
Thank you for listening to this content by Alex Merced. If you would like to support the efforts of Alex Merced, head over to donate.alexmerced.com. Here you'll find options for monthly donations, one-time donations, and several offers that you can take advantage of. Your support helps Alex Merced to be able to dedicate the time, effort, and resources to create quality content like this and even more, and to continue to expand his efforts. Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and you're listening to Alex Merced, the Alex Merced Cast. And today what I want to talk about is I was listening to this episode, I think it was of The Weeds on Vox, where they were interviewing Karl Smith. Karl Smith is a Keynesian economist, probably most well-known in libertarian circles because he debated Robert Murphy on the recession and the response to the recession back in like 2009, 2010, around that period of time. Which was actually a really good debate, fun to listen to, helped me kind of understand both perspectives a little bit more at the time when I was sort of learning more about all these different economic perspectives. But there was a couple things said throughout this discussion on the Weeds, which is a great show. So while the hosts over there at Vox tend to lean sort of progressive, the shows like The Weeds and the Ezra Klein Show, they do go into a lot of really interesting depth on a lot of topics that even if you disagree with them, there's value to be harvested from listening to those shows. So I do recommend them, that and The Impact, which is another Vox podcast. Now, what happens here is they're talking about monetary policy, and the idea is to help people who listen to The Weeds understand sort of the role of monetary policy more. And this is kind of where I started taking issue, because what Karl Smith is trying to do at the very beginning of the episode is kind of defend the idea that capitalism is a good thing. Just saying that we've been capitalizing or doing capitalism wrong, and arguing that, the promise of capitalism is, full employment, or implying such, which there is no promise of capitalism. Capitalism, one, is just a term that was used as a pejorative to denigrate sort of how certain institutions evolved, how basically things became more geared towards private property, individual ownership, group ownership of things, instead of sort of more centralized feudalism of the past, where basically you had a few feudal lords who owned everything and everyone rented everything from the feudal lords, and basically you had no choice of career. Your career was whatever your parents' job was. And we kind of shifted into a world where basically you could actually own land. You could actually purchase land. You could accumulate wealth. You could do the job that you wanted. And this is essentially what people are generally referring to when they say capitalism, although when you talk to 10 different people, you'll get 10 different definitions of what they mean by capitalism. So while to me, when I think capitalism, I'm thinking just really free markets, that people will be able to enter arrangements freely, do business freely. And Karl Smith generally means that too, but he's saying that there is support that the government should use so that way capitalism meets its full promise of full employment, meaning everybody has a job. Because then when you have tight labor markets, that's when capitalism really gives you what it's meant to give you. Which I disagree with, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But other people, when they say capitalism, they just mean sort of the relationship between employer and employee. And so when you sit there and you talk to them about the benefit of free markets, they're not listening to you, because to them, you're not focusing on this whole idea that there's a boss and an employee, and then that the boss has this sort of power over the employee to put the employee in tight situations, like, oh, my kid's sick, and my boss says I still gotta go to work. And to them, like, that's such a bad dynamic that all the benefits be gone of capitalism. Like, that's just really, really, really bad that someone has that much power over someone else, because of just the way. It's not necessarily power that you could just turn down your boss and quit your job. It's different than, let's say, back in the days of feudalism, where that could put you in jail and put you in a prison somewhere, or get you killed. But again, that's a lot of times that's a much further left type thinking, where they're just thinking about sort of the absolute relative power that individuals hold over each other, And they generally have just this total distaste of sort of huge disparities in power, regardless of whether that power comes from voluntary relationships or involuntary relationships. Although the result oftentimes is they end up creating involuntary relationships with huge disparities of power, which is sort of ironic in that mode of thinking. Cool. So now that we kind of discussed capitalism, but at the end of the day, really, markets are just the way the economy works now. Something just kind of evolved. There was no one suddenly saying, "Hey, we're going to try capitalism now, and capitalism is going to give us X, Y, Z." No, it's different people with different interests reform different things at different times to get sort of the mix of economic institutions and rules and institutions that we have now. But the benefits, to me, of a much more free market, by and large, is not full employment. That can happen, but it's more the knowledge that's created, because now everyone is able to kind of affect prices, to affect investment decisions. That's number one, and let's focus on that for a moment. So one way to think about the economy is that at any given moment, the economy is a huge mix of goods, services, resources that exist. And there's a sort of a limited number of there's a limited amount of them and a limited number of ways to use them. The question is, how do we employ these scarce resources? Now, the problem is, when you do a puzzle, okay, so all these different things are puzzle pieces of a larger puzzle. If you do a puzzle, you can kind of take a look at the puzzle as a whole and try to piece it together. The problem is this puzzle is so big and there's so many pieces that there's no possible way that everyone can kind of truly see how all these pieces fit together, which is why central planning doesn't work. There's just too many pieces. They fit together in too many ways for anyone to kind of single-handedly put this together. So this is generally the reason for free markets. This allows everybody else to kind of focus on the pieces that are sort of relative to them and try to make them fit together as best as possible, okay? And everyone is going to naturally want the pieces that relate to them to fit better. So there's this sort of, everyone's individual self-interest is trying to figure out how to make this puzzle fit better. You're trying to figure out the pieces that you want, how they fit better, but someone else is figuring out the pieces that they want, they fit better, and we just keep getting to a much better fitting puzzle. Now, at some point, and that results in there being sort of more, because you're making best use, you're over time finding the best uses of the mix of resources, practices, institutions that exist at that moment. So this is sort of the move towards the natural move towards equilibrium. It's not because there's just some magic, hey, we just know what equilibrium is. It's just a lot of everyone doing trial and error. Everyone doing, I would like things to be better. I don't think this is the best. Let me try something else. And you just kind of keep working your way there. And then every time someone makes a mistake, you know, not to make that same mistake again. And every time they do something good that works out, we're like, hey, let's repeat that. And we're creating this knowledge that allows us to build that puzzle together faster and faster, which would lead to a much greater level of employment over time. But it doesn't happen overnight, doesn't happen in a year, doesn't happen in a couple of years. The economy is just sort of moving towards this equilibrium at any given point. But then new technology comes into play. New technology suddenly change, and that new technology doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like computers, whatnot. It could be new practices, new rules, new institutions that create sort of new dynamics between what has existed. These suddenly change all the puzzle pieces. All the puzzle pieces' shapes have suddenly changed, and now they don't fit together as good as they used to. Okay, so now everyone has to go back to start rethinking. So the individuals in the economy are an equilibrating force in the sense that they're constantly trying to seek how to fit these pieces together better, because they're looking to extend the comfort of their life, attain their desire or wants and needs. Well, technology and innovation, which is also incentivized by that free market, because people who find that their pieces of the puzzle can only fit so well are going to try to find ways to make it fit better, and they're going to innovate. They're going to try to discover new things, and when they discover new things, they disequilibrate. So they make the puzzle suddenly all mixed up. But that's a good thing, because what happens is that even though they've disequilibrated and things have now you maybe have less employment in the immediate run, because you don't need people here and you're still hiring people, training and hiring people for over here, you have this sort of mismatch of where everything is at the moment. When everybody retools and reassembles the puzzle is even bigger. Okay, and that's kind of how the economy works. There's all these puzzle pieces. We're constantly discovering how those puzzle pieces work. But what government policy does is it tries to force pieces to fit together that don't naturally fit together. And the problem is, if I force a piece to be in the puzzle to be fit over here, well, that puzzle piece maybe belonged over here, and now it's not there, and that portion of the puzzle isn't built as well as it could have been because I forced the piece to be used somewhere else. So overall, the puzzle is just a weaker puzzle. Okay, and eventually, when you realize that you've put too many puzzle pieces in the wrong places, you just have to basically break apart the puzzle and rebuild, and that's essentially what a recession is. Okay, and that's why. And this is kind of what, when you think of like Austrian economists, or what's referred to as the Austrian school, this is kind of what they're getting at. This whole idea of coordination. The idea is that basically everyone is constantly coordinating all the goods and resources in the economy based on our knowledge and our experiences, based on what's aware of us, but not everyone's aware of every policy at every level, of every decision, of every made. So when government interferes, they oftentimes make it harder to coordinate accurately, and this creates sort of this compounds a bunch of we'll refer to as malinvestment, meaning we put the puzzle piece in the wrong place, which then leads to the recession. So the puzzles look like you're building this nice puzzle. That's the boom. You're like, oh, this puzzle's building out and it looks really pretty. And then you realize, oh man, I really put that together wrong. So then you have to tear it down to rebuild, but you'll be able to rebuild it better because you're doing it right the second time if you just let yourself take it down. That's the bust. So boom, bust. So boom, we put the puzzle together sort of wrong. It's not that we had extra pieces or too little pieces. So it's not under or over investment. It's just that we malinvested, put the pieces in the wrong places. The bust is when we sit there and say, okay, let's take all the pieces that were in the wrong place, take them out, and start building the puzzle again. That's the bust. Now, governments don't like that because, again, when you think of this puzzle as the economy, so when you're pulling those pieces out, essentially you're creating unemployment. So they say, let's figure out some ways to keep those pieces there and whatnot. So then what happens? You just continue building from where you were, or maybe you took down a couple pieces, but not as all the wrong pieces because the government said, no, here, let's shave a little off the edge here, shave a little off the edge there, and force these pieces together. And then you end up building on that sort of bad puzzle again, which makes sort of the next, or at some point when you don't have the policy firepower to use monetary policy or fiscal policy to stimulate, at some point that liquidation will occur, and it's just going to be that much deeper because there's just that many more wrong pieces. And again, it's a little bit more complicated because sometimes there's innovations, and some innovations may make some malinvestments no longer relevant in the future. Certain debts get worked out. So it's not necessarily, as simple as I'm putting it, but this is, I think, a fairly good way of imagining sort of how everything works and why it's important that everyone sort of has their individual pieces. But the problem with what Karl Smith is saying is that he's looking at monetary policy, the ability to sort of manipulate interest rates as a way to support the economy. Well, to me, it's a way to sort of interfere in people's ability to coordinate. Okay, so you can lower interest rates and you can spur more employment at a time because you're spurring more investment. People will borrow more, invest more, or not necessarily even invest more. They will invest differently. They'll take on different, more capital-intensive projects that are longer term that'll probably to greater growth of employment. Versus maybe other projects they would have undertaken at higher rates. So again, it's not over or under investment, but malinvestment. It's not that we wouldn't have the money wouldn't have not been invested otherwise. It just would have been invested differently. Maybe into safer, lower return investments, which may have been maybe more suitable. Interest rates can't tell you what the economy needs. So when the government interferes in interest rates, you kind of steer the investment capital to either higher risk investments than they otherwise would have been, or lower risk investments than they would have been. And that's going to have an effect on the overall makeup of capital in the economy, which again can screw up the puzzle. But yeah, it can definitely affect short-run employment. And that's kind of what Carl's getting at, saying, well, that's why we need to keep rates low because, it helps us create that tight labor market that's going to create the promise of capitalism. Okay, and I know he gets a lot more nuance in the discussion, so please do listen to that episode of The Weeds, but I'm trying to criticize a general thrust of what his argument was. So that's my issue, okay, and that technology's disequilibration is a good thing in the long run, that a lot of those things that people will criticize of free markets in short runs is oftentimes what makes it work in the long run to more people's benefit more of the time, because it allows us to discover the knowledge and get the information so we can build a better puzzle instead of just trying to force the pieces that exist to a okay or maybe passable version for now that falls apart later. So that's my take on it. My name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I'll talk to you guys later on. This show is sponsored by Bluehost, Amazon's Audible, and NordVPN. To take advantage of their offers and products, check out libertarianbuyer.com, where you'll find those and many more sponsors of this content. Make sure to check out Libertarian Buyer.
Thank you for listening to the Alex Merced Cast. Learn more at alexmerced.com, libertarian101.com, and libertarianwingmedia.com. Follow Alex Merced on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.